Today, we are opening up one of the most important chapters in history, the time of the Church Fathers. We're talking about the period from roughly 100 to 600 AD, when a group of thinkers, writers, and leaders essentially built the intellectual framework for what would become Christianity for the next 2,000 years.
So let's just get right to the heart of it with a huge question, one that's been made famous by books and movies. The idea is this: was Jesus originally just seen as a great human teacher, a prophet, but not God? And was his divinity basically invented hundreds of years later by a Roman emperor who needed it for his own political reasons?
You've probably heard this claim, right? The Da Vinci Code put it front and center, that Jesus was just a great and powerful man until he was turned into a god by a vote at the Council of Nicaea. But the historical sources we're digging into tell a completely different story. They argue that the belief in Jesus' divinity was there from the very, very beginning. So who's right? Well, let's follow the evidence. First up, we need to understand that this isn't just some dusty old debate. It's really a modern mystery about how we read history, and it all seems to pivot on what really went down in the 4th century.
So, to get to the bottom of it, we have to rewind. We have to go before that pivotal 4th century. What did the very first Christians, and just as importantly, their enemies, actually believe?
Now check this out. Our first clue doesn't come from a Christian text. It's actually an insult, a piece of graffiti scratched into a wall in Rome, probably around 200 AD. It shows a kid named Alexamenos worshiping a crucified man with the head of a donkey. And look at the words scrawled underneath. Alexamenos worships his God. This is huge. It means even a pagan, someone mocking the faith, understood that Christians worship their crucified founder as a god. And this was over a century before the Council of Nicaea even happened.
Okay, let's go back even further. Around the year 110, a Roman governor named Pliny the Younger sends a report back to the emperor about this new, kind of weird religious group. And what does he say about them? He reports that they gather together to sing a hymn to Christ as to a god. Think about that. This is an official Roman document almost 200 years before Nicaea, and it's plain as day. Worshipping Jesus as God was just what Christians did.
And of course, the Christians themselves were saying the same thing. This is from an anonymous Christian letter written in the 2nd century, and they are not subtle about it. It says God sent the very designer and maker of the universe. And how did he send him? He sent him as God. The belief was right there, out in the open, long before any emperor decided to get involved. All right, so keeping that early evidence in mind, let's fast forward to the 4th century. Because this is where the main character in this whole controversy shows up, the Roman Emperor Constantine. If he didn't invent Jesus' divinity, then what on earth was he doing? So the big problem Constantine was facing wasn't a debate about whether Jesus was a man or a god. The fight was actually more of a theological civil war inside the church. A popular priest named Arius started teaching that Jesus, yeah, he was divine, but he was a created being. He wasn't eternal and equal with God the Father. This idea was tearing the church apart. Constantine, being a smart politician, needed a unified empire, so he called the Council of Nicaea to get everyone in a room and end the fight. His goal wasn't to invent a belief, it was to settle a dispute by reinforcing what the church had traditionally taught. And the bishops at the council did it with one single, incredibly important Greek word: homoousios. It means of the same substance. By putting that word into what became the Nicene Creed, they were drawing a line in the sand. They were saying, officially, that the Son is not some lesser created being. He is fully God, made of the exact same divine stuff as the Father. It was a clarification, not an invention.
And once the emperor threw his weight behind Christianity, its impact on the Roman world was absolutely massive. I mean, this faith started to change everything. Crucifixion, the ultimate symbol of Roman terror, was abolished. Sunday became an official holiday. The bloody gladiatorial games were outlawed. And for the first time, this complicated relationship between the church and the government began, a relationship that would shape the next 1,500 years of Western history. But settling the debate about the Son's divinity was really just the beginning. This whole process of hashing things out in response to new challenges became the signature move of this era, and it shaped a lot more than just one doctrine. Just look at the doctrine of the Trinity. Nicaea in 325 only handled the question of the Son. Pretty soon, a new fight started up. Okay, but what about the Holy Spirit? Is the Spirit also God or something else? A group that got the nickname Fighters Against the Spirit said the Spirit was a creature, not divine. This kicked off decades of more arguments, which led to brilliant thinkers like Basil of Caesarea writing defenses.
And finally, in 381, another big council in Constantinople made it official: the Holy Spirit is also fully God, to be worshipped and glorified right alongside the Father and the Son. And there you have it, the core doctrine of the Trinity, finalized.
And it wasn't just ideas being forged. It was the actual power structure of the church. The whole concept of a single supreme pope in Rome, that didn't just pop into existence. It was built piece by piece over centuries. You can see the progression right here. In the 200s, a bishop of Rome is the first to really lean on the idea that he's in Peter's chair. 100 years later, another bishop makes that connection to Peter the core of his authority, and by the mid-400s you get Leo I, who lays out the whole theory of papal supremacy, that he's Peter's heir and has authority over the whole church. It was a slow, deliberate construction of power.
So, after all the councils, all the arguments, all the building, what did the Church Fathers actually leave behind? What's their legacy?
Well, for better or for worse, these are the foundations they laid. They're the ones who finalized the list of books in the New Testament, the canon. They hammered out the doctrine of the Trinity. They kicked off that messy, complicated dance between church and state. They built the foundation for the papacy, and they produced absolute giants of thought, like Augustine, whose ideas would go on to shape basically all of Western civilization.
And just to get a sense of how deep their thinking went, consider Augustine. He wrote his masterpiece, City of God, right after Rome itself had been sacked by invaders, something people thought was impossible. And in that moment of total chaos, he comes up with this incredible vision of two cities. There's the earthly city, obsessed with its own power and leaders, and then there's the heavenly city, which finds its strength not in itself, but in God. It was that kind of profound response to real-world crisis that made this era so formative. So in the end, the era of the Church Fathers wasn't about a handful of men in a back room inventing new beliefs. It was a messy, passionate, centuries-long struggle to define, defend, and build a world on top of beliefs they were convinced had been there from the start. And that leaves us with one final thought. In our own time, which is full of its own arguments and divisions, what can we learn from the people who built these foundations?